Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The question hung in the heavy air of the operations room long before anyone dared to speak it. She stood near the back, motionless, clipboard in hand, her posture straight but unassuming. Evelyn Reed, Evie to the few who ever bothered to learn her name, wasn't supposed to draw attention. She was the kind of person people's eyes slid past, the quiet figure who signed them in at the checkpoint, checked their badges, and melted back into the hum of base life. Yet that morning, something about her silence made the Admiral tap his pen harder against the tabletop. Rear Admiral Thompson liked his world neat, predictable, and obedient. Every rank had its sound, every order its echo. The woman standing behind the security chief didn't fit the rhythm. She didn't flinch under his stare, didn't smile, didn't shrink, just stood there, eyes calm, observing, always observing. The Admiral cleared his throat. All right, people were done here. Chairs scraped. Uniforms rustled. Officers drifted toward the door with that clipped, hurried purpose only the Navy could breed. Evelyn moved last, waiting until the room had emptied before she turned away. No one noticed the small frown that tugged at the corner of her mouth, or how her fingers brushed the thin silver bracelet on her wrist, a habit, a quiet anchor when the noise of authority pressed too hard against her ribs. Outside, the Virginia sun poured over the tarmac, glinting off polished hulls and the mirrored visors of sailors on ceremonial duty. She paused at the doorway, eyes narrowing at the shimmer of heat. To most, the base was just another day's duty. Checklists, drills, the grind of routine. To Evelyn, it was something else, a stage built on ghosts. She started her patrol, steady and measured, the faintest limp tracing the memory of pain through her left leg. Every step was deliberate, each glance a calculation. She noticed the corroded latch on the emergency gate, the reflection of an unsecured panel in a truck's windshield, the nervous recruit who kept adjusting his sidearm. She cataloged everything, quietly correcting what she could, making notes for what she couldn't. "Morning, Evie," a young seaman called, flashing the grin of someone who still believed cheerfulness could cover insecurity. "Morning," she answered softly. No rank, no authority, just routine civility. He jogged away, and the silence folded back around her. In another life, one she rarely allowed herself to remember, silence had been a luxury. Up there, silence meant the engines were running perfectly. Silence meant the enemy radar hadn't locked yet. Silence meant life. She exhaled slowly. That life was gone. Now this gate, this uniform, this repetition, this was her penance. The announcement crackled over the base loudspeaker. "All personnel prepare for the commissioning ceremony, Pier 12. The voice was bright, official, almost jubilant. Evelyn's gaze drifted toward the waterfront where banners snapped in the wind and families began to gather, waving miniature flags. She could already picture the Admiral's polished shoes, the photographers, the speeches about honor and sacrifice. She had stood on too many flight decks hearing those words while watching the sea swallow the horizon. They always sounded cleaner from behind a microphone. By noon, the heat pressed down like a physical weight. Evelyn manned her post at the VIP checkpoint, a folding table, a scanner, and a clipboard. She'd done it 100 times. Check credentials, match faces, maintain order. Nothing glamorous, nothing heroic. That's what she liked about it. But not everyone respected boundaries. She heard them before she saw them, the brisk cadence of polished leather, the low murmur of aides, the hard authority of rank. Rear Admiral Thompson strode toward her with a tall man beside him. The general's medals caught the sunlight, flashing like small suns. Evelyn straightened instinctively. "Afternoon, sir." Her tone was even respectful. "Credentials, please." Thompson's jaw tightened. "This is General Miller. His credentials are unimpeachable. Your scanner's faulty. Let him through." Evelyn lifted the scanner, pressed the button again. The small red light blinked stubbornly. "Protocol requires visual confirmation from command post if the digital fails. It'll just take a moment." A moment too long for the Admiral's pride. His eyes sharpened. The crowd nearby sensed the tension, a ripple of whispers, shifting feet, forced coughs. "Your job is to facilitate, not obstruct," he hissed, leaning close enough that she caught the scent of expensive aftershave. "Step aside, or I'll have you removed from this base permanently." Her heart thudded once, a quiet, controlled beat. Not fear, something colder. "Sir," she said evenly, "with respect, I'm following protocol." He stared at her, as if she'd just spoken another language. For a long moment the world held its breath. Then the voice crackled in her earpiece. "Security confirms credentials mismatch. Hold position." Evelyn kept her expression neutral. "Confirmed. Thank you, Command." She looked back at the Admiral. "There's been a clerical error, sir. It's being corrected now." The General shifted awkwardly. Thompson's lips compressed into a thin line. He said nothing. When the confirmation finally cleared, he marched through without another word, anger radiating like heat from an engine. Evelyn exhaled quietly. The moment passed, the world resumed. But she knew this wasn't over. Men like Thompson didn't forget slights, especially from people they considered invisible. Later in the locker room, she sat alone on the wooden bench, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. Her reflection in the metal locker door stared back. A woman of 42, hair pulled tight, skin lined just enough to hint at years she didn't talk about. She rolled up her sleeve slightly, eyes resting on the faint ridge of a scar snaking down her forearm. It still caught the light like memory. She remembered the cockpit, the violent shudder, the alarm screaming, the tearing sound of wind clawing metal apart, the explosion of light, the feeling of falling, the silence afterward. She pressed her fingers over the scar. The past had left its mark, but so had survival. When she returned to the pier, the ceremony was in full swing. The band played patriotic marches, the smell of salt water and jet fuel mingling with the perfume of freshly starched uniforms. Families cheered, cameras flashed. On stage, Admiral Thompson's smile gleamed like a polished metal. Evelyn stayed in the background, directing foot traffic, keeping the aisles clear. She preferred it that way, order without spotlight. But fate rarely respected preference. "Evie needs you near the VIP section," her radio crackled. She moved quickly, scanning faces, scanning hands, reading tension in body language the way others read print. She learned to see patterns who carried authority, who carried fear, who carried something else entirely. Her pulse steadied. Every instinct she'd buried under quiet civilian years hummed awake. Then she saw him again, Thompson, cutting through the crowd toward her. His stride was deliberate, his expression carved from stone. Something inside her coiled, ready. He stopped inches from her. The nearby conversations faded into uneasy silence. "I thought I made myself clear earlier," he said, voice low but meant to carry. "Your job is to be seen and not heard. You are a civilian contractor. You have no authority to delay a general, and certainly none to direct personnel on my pier." Each word struck like a blow, designed not to wound, but to humiliate. Evelyn's throat tightened. She forced her voice calm. "My apologies, Admiral. I was ensuring a clear path for the honor guard." He leaned closer, eyes hard. "You are relieved of duty. Report to your supervisor. You're done here." A soft murmur rippled through the spectators, that uncomfortable sound of shared disbelief mixed with voyeuristic curiosity. The Admiral had made his spectacle. Evelyn swallowed. For a fraction of a second, anger flared not for herself, but for the principle she'd tried to uphold. Then she felt the old discipline take over, cooling the fire, shaping it into composure. "Aye, sir." She turned, walking away from the pier. The crowd parted, whispering. Her steps were even, unhurried. But as she moved, a gust of harbor wind caught her sleeve, pushing it up past her elbow. Gasps followed, small, involuntary sounds. The scar gleamed harshly in the sunlight, jagged, brutal, unmistakable. Not the mark of an accident, but of combat, of shrapnel and fire. A Marine gunnery sergeant nearby froze, recognition flickering in his eyes. He'd seen that kind of wound before. He frowned, watching her go, questions blooming in his mind. She reached the edge of the crowd, head high, jaw tight. A faint shift of her collar revealed another secret, just a trace of ink below her neckline, two angled black talons. The gunny's breath caught. He'd seen that symbol once, painted beneath the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor. But that couldn't be right. Meanwhile, at the checkpoint, a group of Navy SEALs approached, their desert-worn faces a stark contrast to the pristine whites around them. They moved with the unspoken precision of men who'd seen too much and said too little. Their commander, a tall lieutenant with eyes like winter steel, noticed the commotion. His gaze followed the direction of the murmurs, toward the woman walking away. Something about the set of her shoulders, the disciplined rhythm of her gait, snagged a thread of memory he hadn't touched in years. "Chief," he murmured to the grizzled man beside him, "you see that guard? The one the Admiral just tossed?" "Yeah, look again." The chief squinted, then shrugged. "Just some contractor." The commander's eyes narrowed. No, not that posture, not that awareness. He felt his chest tighten, the echo of a name whispered across a dozen dusty outposts, a legend traded between pilots and special operators. A call sign, half myth, half warning. He mouthed the word before he realized he'd said it aloud. Wraith. He stood motionless, the name stirring like wind through the ranks. The woman everyone had dismissed as invisible was already halfway down the pier, sunlight burning across her scar, eyes forward, every step haunted by ghosts she'd tried to bury. She had no idea that the past she'd spent years outrunning had just recognized her walk. And somewhere behind her, the universe held its breath, because fate was about to remind Evelyn Reed that ghosts never stay buried for long. The sound came first, a metallic shriek that tore through the afternoon air like the scream of something alive and dying at once. Heads turned, laughter stopped. Evelyn froze mid-step, instincts flaring before thought could form. She knew that sound. The raw, tortured pitch of steel under strain, it lived somewhere in her nerves, the sound that came right before disaster. Her eyes lifted toward the stage. The lighting rig, a monstrous tower of lamps and cables, was trembling. Hydraulic arms buckled in the heat. A bolt snapped, flashing silver as it spun through the air. The structure leaned, slow at first, then faster, the whole world narrowing to that single, awful motion. Children screamed. Time fractured. She didn't think she became. Brace and cover, the words ripped from her throat, sharp as gunfire. They didn't come from the quiet security guard. They came from something older, something forged in sky and fire. The command cut through the chaos like a blade. People dropped, parents shielding kids, sailors grabbing civilians, bodies hitting the deck. Evelyn was already moving, running parallel to the falling rig, her limp gone, her stride clean, surgical. VIPs against the bulkhead. Stage right, she shouted, voice slicing through panic. Her eyes were calculating, angles, distance, collapse vectors. Years of combat training spoke through muscle memory. She spotted two young sailors frozen near the bleachers. You two, children, Corridor 11, move. They didn't question, they moved. The lighting rig slammed down with a deafening boom, a burst of dust and debris exploding across the pier. Screams turned to coughs, smoke, silence. Then slowly the realization the section where it hit was empty. She'd cleared it seconds before impact. Through the haze, the Admiral stood frozen, the world having just rewritten itself in front of him. His eyes locked on the woman he'd fired minutes ago, the one now issuing calm, clipped orders as if she'd never stopped commanding. Get medics forward, contain the perimeter, she barked, crouching beside a crying child, checking for injuries with quick, sure hands. You're okay, sweetheart. Stay down, you're safe. Her voice softened for the child, one heartbeat of humanity, before she snapped back into command mode. The SEAL team, who had already begun to rush forward, stopped mid-stride. They'd seen this before, that look, that instinctive authority, the way chaos bent around her voice. "Holy hell," the Master Chief muttered. "Commander, tell me you're seeing this." The SEAL leader didn't answer. His pulse was steady, eyes locked on the woman kneeling in the dust. "Yeah," he whispered, "I'm seeing it." He'd seen people freeze, panic, run, but she had moved like she was born in the storm. Not with hesitation, but with command, pure, ingrained, unbreakable command. The rig hissed and groaned as its frame settled. The air filled with the smell of scorched metal and fear. Families clung to one another. Officers stumbled, shouting orders that no one heard. Only Evelyn's voice carried, calm, direct, unmistakably trained. Her hands trembled once briefly as she checked the bleeding arm of a sailor. The tremor wasn't from fear. It was adrenaline, the old rhythm returning after too long a sleep. "You're going to be fine," she said, pressing a bandage to the wound. "Stay still, keep pressure here." The sailor nodded, staring at her like she was something unreal. Admiral Thompson stood a few yards away, still processing. His mind clung to titles: civilian contractor, security guard, but the woman in front of him didn't fit either. He'd seen combat. He knew the difference between control and chaos. And this woman, this quiet, nameless guard, was control embodied. He wanted to speak but found nothing to say. The SEAL commander finally moved. He walked forward slowly, past stunned officers, past photographers with half-raised cameras, until he stood a few feet from Evelyn. She was checking a fallen stagehand, pulse steady, eyes scanning. She felt his presence before she looked up. Their eyes met. He saw it immediately, the faint scar along her temple, the precision in her gaze, the stillness that only combat breeds. It was her. It had to be. He didn't salute yet, not until he was sure, but the name pulsed in his chest like a heartbeat. "Wraith." "Admiral," he said quietly, voice edged with awe. "You might want to know who you just relieved of duty." Thompson blinked, voice caught between disbelief and defensiveness. "What are you talking about, Commander?" The SEAL didn't answer. Instead, he knelt beside Evelyn, speaking low. "Permission to confirm, ma'am." Evelyn froze. That single word, "ma'am," hit her harder than the explosion. No one had called her that in years. Her throat tightened. She didn't look up. "You're mistaken," she murmured. The commander shook his head. "No, I'm not." He rose to his full height, turned toward the Admiral, and said it for everyone to hear. "Admiral Thompson," he said, voice steady, carrying across the pier, "you are addressing Major Evelyn Reed, United States Air Force, retired." The world went silent. For a full 5 seconds, no one breathed. A murmur started somewhere, one voice then another, like the slow swell of surf. "Major, Air Force, Reed." Thompson's face went pale. "That's impossible," he stammered. She's a contractor." The commander's eyes didn't leave Evelyn. His next words dropped like thunder. "Her call sign," he said, voice lowering into reverent certainty, "is Wraith." The name hung in the air, rippling outward. For the sailors and aviators who knew, it was like hearing a ghost's name. Wraith, the legendary pilot who flew black missions over enemy skis, the woman who disappeared after a catastrophic ejection that was supposed to have ended her life. Every rumor had ended with a question mark, until now. The SEAL team snapped to attention instinctively, their posture straight as steel. The commander saluted, crisp, sharp, flawless, not the perfunctory salute of rank but of reverence. "Ma'am," he said, voice thick, "it's an honor." The sound of hands meeting brows echoed in the stunned silence, one salute, then another, then dozens. The wave spread like wildfire. Marines, sailors, even civilian contractors who didn't understand the details felt it in their bones. Something sacred was happening. Evelyn stood frozen, surrounded by salutes she hadn't asked for, faces filled with awe she didn't want. Her jaw clenched, her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. She'd hidden for years because of this, because legend had weight, because admiration could feel like a prison. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking through the still air, "that's enough." But no one lowered their hands. Even the admiral, red-faced, shaking, slowly raised his salute. It was stiff, awkward, but real. And in that single motion, the arrogance drained from him. What replaced it wasn't shame alone, but realization, the raw, human understanding of how wrong he'd been. He lowered his hand after everyone else. When he spoke, his voice trembled. "Major Reed," he said, forcing the words through tight lips. "My conduct was," he stopped, unable to finish, "inexcusable." Evelyn looked at him, really looked. She saw no uniform, no rank, just a man standing in the ruins of his own pride. "We all have a job to do, Admiral," she said quietly. "Today, mine was this checkpoint." Her words carried a grace that stung more than rebuke. She turned, kneeling beside a fallen child, helping him to his feet. The crowd parted for her as if instinctively clearing a runway. She didn't linger in the glory, she didn't bask in recognition. She went back to work, checking on people, giving water, guiding medics. Duty first, always. Behind her, the SEAL commander stood motionless, the name Wraith echoing in his mind like a prayer. He'd met heroes, legends, ghosts, but this woman, quiet, scarred, unassuming, carried something rarer. Not pride, not vengeance, peace. He turned to his men. "Never forget what you saw today." One of the younger SEALs whispered, "Sir, was she really?" The commander cut him off gently. She was exactly who she needed to be. The sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, casting the pier in gold and shadow. Reporters still whispered, families huddled in awe, and somewhere in the crowd, a little girl tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy," she asked, pointing at Evelyn, "is she a superhero?" The father hesitated, watching the woman who just saved them, who now helped strangers with quiet efficiency. "No, sweetheart," he said softly, "she's something better." Evelyn heard the words but didn't turn. She didn't need to. She just smiled faintly, the kind of smile you give when the world finally sees you, but you no longer need it to. As the sun set, the wind picked up again, tugging at her sleeve, whispering across the scar on her arm like an old friend. She looked out over the harbor, calm, endless, unjudging, and exhaled. The ghosts of the past didn't feel so heavy now. In the distance, a lone fighter jet crossed the sky, its contrail glowing in the dying light. She watched it disappear into the clouds and whispered something only the wind could hear. "Clear skies." Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. No one really left the pier that evening. The ceremony had been canceled, of course, but people lingered, talking in low voices, glancing back toward the spot where the lighting rig still lay in twisted ruin. Something sacred had happened there, something none of them had the right words for. They called it the salute that silenced Norfolk. Reporters didn't cover it properly. The Navy kept the details contained, citing security discretion. But the story spread faster than orders ever could. Sailors told their wives. Marines texted old unit friends. Within hours, Evelyn Reed's name, or rather, her call sign, moved through mess halls, ready rooms, and veterans' bars like a ghost coming home. But Evelyn didn't see any of that. She was still at the base infirmary, sitting quietly in a corner, her arm wrapped in gauze where she'd cut it on a fragment of metal during the chaos. The medic had offered a stretcher. She'd refused. She spent enough time flat on her back in a hospital bed years ago. Her breathing was steady now, her face calm, but inside, her pulse still hummed with leftover adrenaline, that strange, hollow vibration that always came after the storm. Across from her, the SEAL commander stood waiting, hands clasped behind his back, the stiffness of military habit meeting the uncertainty of reverence. He didn't speak for a long while. Neither did she. Finally, he broke the silence. "You really thought you could hide forever." Her lips curved faintly, though not in humor. "Didn't think, just tried." He nodded, studying her face, the faint crow's feet near her eyes, the faded scar across her jawline. She looked older than the legend he'd heard about, and somehow younger at the same time. "I flew cover for your squad once," he said quietly. "Operation Midnight Spire. We never met, but your name came up in the after-action debrief. You pulled a crippled raptor out of a SAM nest." Evelyn didn't look at him. Lucky timing. He shook his head. "No, precision, the kind that doesn't come from luck." She didn't answer. The commander stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We all thought you were dead, Major, after the crash, after they—" She cut him off gently. "They told you I'd never walk again." He nodded once. "Well," she murmured, glancing at the floor, "they weren't wrong for a while." The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with things neither wanted to say. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the space where pain used to live. "You saved those families today," he said finally. "You saved the Admiral's career too, though he doesn't know it yet." Evelyn's gaze lifted to the window. Beyond the glass, the sea shimmered black under the setting sun. "I didn't do it for him." "I know." He hesitated. "You could come back, you know. Training, command advisory, flight evaluation. There are a dozen posts that kill for your experience." She smiled faintly, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "I've had my flight hours, Commander. I'm grounded now, literally and otherwise." He wanted to argue, but something in her tone stopped him. The conviction wasn't sadness, it was peace. Hard-earned. "You ever miss it?" he asked. Evelyn's answer came like a sigh. "Every day, but missing isn't the same as belonging." For a long time, the only sound was the distant whir of helicopters. The pier was quiet now. The chaos had been cleared. The families had gone home. When she finally stood, he noticed the stiffness in her left leg, the way she shifted her weight carefully before walking. It wasn't weakness. It was memory. "Major," he said as she passed, "I'll tell them what happened here today." She paused at the door, her silhouette framed by the harsh fluorescent light. "Tell them whatever helps them sleep," she said softly. "Just don't make it a legend again." Then she was gone. Rear Admiral Thompson sat alone in his office hours later, long after the base had gone dark. His uniform jacket hung over the chair, the top button of his shirt undone, his medals glinting dimly in the lamplight. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and salt, the same as it always did, but to him it felt different tonight. He'd been writing an apology letter for nearly an hour, and had managed only 3 sentences. Every time he tried to explain himself, the words collapsed under the weight of their own excuses. "My behavior was unprofessional. My judgment was clouded by—" No, none of it felt like enough. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. The image of her face kept replaying, calm, composed, unflinching, as he tried to humiliate her in front of everyone. He remembered her eyes, that hazel stillness that saw right through him. He'd mistaken it for timidity. Now he realized it had been control. He stood, packing to the window. Out on the pier, floodlights illuminated the wreckage still waiting to be hauled away. The twisted steel reflected the light in cruel, jagged patterns, the perfect mirror to his own arrogance. He thought about how the SEALs had saluted her, about how the crowd had followed. He'd spent 30 years chasing that kind of respect, and she'd earned it standing in khaki pants and a polo shirt. He sat back down, staring at the empty letter. Then, slowly, he began again. "Major Reed, there are no words sufficient for the debt of humility I owe you. I mistook silence for weakness and calm for compliance. You taught me today that true authority doesn't need volume, it needs presence. If you'll allow it, I'd like to meet with you in private, not as an admiral to a subordinate, but as a man to the one who reminded him what honor actually looks like." He set the pen down, exhaled, and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control, and strangely, that felt like the beginning of something good. Evelyn's apartment was small, second floor of an old brick building overlooking a quiet street where streetlights hummed like tired sentries. Inside, it was sparse but clean. A bookshelf, a framed photograph of a fighter jet taken from below, a faded unit patch tucked behind glass. She sat at the window, lights off, the room lit only by the glow of the harbor in the distance. On the table beside her, a steaming mug of black tea and an unopened envelope bearing the Navy's crest. She hadn't opened it yet. She already knew what it said. Commendations, apologies, invitations. She wasn't angry, just tired. She traced a finger along the window pane, following the condensation trail down the glass. Outside, the city lights shimmered like runway beacons. For a fleeting second, she let herself imagine it, the hum of the cockpit, the vibration of the throttle, the horizon tilting beneath her. She could still hear the voice of her old wingman, laughing over the comms. "Wraith, you're too quiet up there." "I'm working," she'd replied. "Quiet's how you stay alive." She blinked the memory away. The crash had been violent, flames, smoke, the wrenching sound of metal splitting open. They told her later that the seat had ejected half a second too late, half a second from death. When she woke up in a German military hospital, she couldn't move her left leg, couldn't breathe without pain. Her commanding officer had stood at the foot of her bed, voice trembling as he told her the doctors didn't expect a full recovery. He'd meant well. But the part that broke her wasn't the injury, it was the silence that followed. The sudden, total quiet of being done. Years later, she still woke sometimes to that silence. She reached for the bracelet on her wrist, turning it slowly. It was tarnished now, the engraving inside worn smooth, but she didn't need to read it. She remembered every letter. "For every sky you conquered." It had been a gift, someone she'd loved once, someone the war had taken. She exhaled softly, the sound closer to a prayer than a sigh. When the knock came at the door, she didn't startle. She simply turned, expecting it. It was Admiral Thompson. He stood in the hallway in civilian clothes, his expression stripped of rank and posture. Just a man with the look of someone who'd come to make things right, even if he didn't know how. "I didn't think you answer," he said quietly. "I almost didn't," she replied. He nodded. "You saved my life today, and my soul, I think." "Let's not make it poetic, Admiral." He gave a faint, self-conscious smile. "Can't help it, comes with the guilt." She gestured for him to sit. He didn't. "I read your file," he said. "I had to. The reports, the citations, everything I ignored today because of a uniform." "I'm not that person anymore," she said simply. He looked at her, really looked, and realized she wasn't deflecting out of modesty. She meant it. "You could have humiliated me back there," he said. "You didn't." She met his eyes. "We both had a job that was mine." He nodded slowly. The words hit harder than any reprimand could. After a long silence, he said, "If you ever want to return any branch, any post, I'll write whatever letter you need." She smiled faintly, the kind that carried gratitude without intention of acceptance. "Thank you, but I already went home once. I won't do it again." He hesitated. "Then what will you do?" Her eyes turned toward the harbor. "Stand my post." The simplicity of it silenced him. When he finally left, the night had deepened. Evelyn closed the door gently behind him and leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, she listened to the heartbeat of her own quiet, steady, alive, free. The wind carried the faint echo of the sea, the same wind that used to lift her through the clouds. Somewhere inside her, she knew she'd never escape the sky. She didn't want to. She just needed to serve it differently now. Because sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do isn't to keep fighting. It's to stand still. And to remember. The night had no stars that evening, just the faint electric pulse of the northern lights trembling on the horizon. Evelyn remembered the color of it more than anything else. Not the sound of the engines, not the chatter in her headset, just that eerie green shimmer painting the edges of the cockpit glass. That was the night she stopped being Evelyn Reed. That was the night she became Wraith. It had started like any other mission, a flight brief, a sealed folder, a nod from a colonel who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The year was classified, the location redacted. Even now, the details blurred like a half-remembered dream, but the feeling that stayed sharp. She could still feel the cold metal of the throttle beneath her glove, the low hum of the F-22 Raptor as it powered up on the tarmac. It wasn't just a machine. It was a living thing, responsive, hungry, deadly. She once told a younger pilot that flying it felt like strapping lightning to your spine. "Call sign Wraith," the tower crackled. "You are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed." The name had been a joke at first, a call sign given because she was too quiet, too reserved in briefings, too unreadable in the air. "You move like a ghost," her crew chief had said once, watching her slip past radar returns in simulation. "We'll call you Wraith." She'd smiled, the name fit. That night she was flying deep into hostile airspace, the kind of mission that didn't officially exist. No wingmen, no backup, a ghost in the dark. "Objective window, 9 minutes," the operations officer's voice crackled through the encrypted channel. "Visual confirm and mark the convoy. No engagement unless fired upon." "Copy," she said. Her own voice was level, almost gentle, the calm of someone who'd already made peace with consequence. Altitude 35,000. Mach 1.8. The Raptor sliced through the dark like a blade through silk. Clouds parted around her canopy in long silver arcs. Below, the frozen terrain glowed faintly in moonlight, mountains and snowfields stretching endless and cold. She adjusted the radar filter, pulse scanning for anomalies. The convoy appeared on her display, 5 vehicles moving fast, tight formation. Too tight. Her instincts prickled. "Control, Wraith. Convoy pattern irregular. Request recon confirm these aren't civilian transports." Static, then a clipped voice. "Wraith, hold position. You are not cleared to engage." "Copy," she said again, but her gut screamed wrong. She adjusted zoom. The thermal feed showed long metal silhouettes mounted on the lead trucks, missile tubes, not humanitarian aid, not escorts, launch systems. Her heart kicked. "Control, I have visual confirmation of armed launch platforms. I'm recommending interception." "Negative," the voice came firmer now. "Maintain course. You are eyes only." She stared at the screen. 9 minutes of fuel reserve before she'd have to turn back. She could still disengage, still follow orders. But she saw something else. A faint heat signature 50 clicks ahead, a small airstrip, lights flickering to life. They were setting up for launch. She didn't have 9 minutes. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "This isn't recon anymore." She flicked the arming switch. Weapon systems hummed awake. The cockpit lit in red. Her finger hovered over the authorization trigger. One order away from court-martial. One disobedience away from saving lives. Her mind replayed the pre-flight briefing. No aggression, no exposure. But she remembered the coordinates projected on the wall. She'd seen the map overlay. The launch zone was within range of a NATO base. If she didn't act now, someone else would pay for her hesitation. Her hand moved. "Wraith, what are you doing?" The voice snapped in her headset. She didn't answer. "Target locked, tone steady, missiles armed." Fox 3. 2 AIM-120 streaked into the night, disappearing into cloud cover. The impact bloomed below seconds later, brilliant, silent, devastating. Her radar screen flared with heat signatures, then blanked. Static flooded her comms. "Wraith, abort, abort. You are not cleared to." Then the world exploded. Something hit her from below, a surface-to-air burst. The cockpit filled with alarms, red lights strobing across her visor. The Raptor shuddered violently, warning panels screaming. Eject, eject. The canopy blasted free. The roar of wind swallowed everything. She felt the seat rocket upward, spine compressing, the sky spinning in chaotic fragments of fire and night. For a moment, she thought she was still flying until gravity found her again. Then nothing. When she woke, it was snowing, soft flakes melting against her cracked visor. Her leg was wrong, twisted, numb. Her right arm burned where the harness had torn flesh. The Raptor was a smoking crater half a kilometer away. The radio on her shoulder sputtered weakly. She pressed the transmitter, wincing. "Control, this is Wraith. I'm down, repeat, I'm down." Silence. Then faintly, "Wraith, extraction in 6 hours. Stay low, you're off the grid." She laughed once, a dry sound that fogged the inside of her visor. Copy. 6 hours in sub-zero temperatures with a broken leg. 6 hours behind enemy lines. She started crawling. Each pull forward sent shocks through her body. She thought of the people she'd saved, the unknown faces at that base that would still be alive because of what she'd done. It was the only thing that kept her moving. By the time the rescue team found her, she was half-conscious, frozen, and silent. They said she'd stopped breathing twice on the flight home. Months later, when the debrief came, she told them what she'd done, exactly what, exactly why. The tribunal called it unauthorized engagement. Her superior officer called it instinct. Washington called it classified. They gave her the Distinguished Flying Cross, quietly, no ceremony, no cameras. Then they told her she would never fly again. She'd smiled when they said it, not because she agreed, because she knew they were right. Years later, sitting in her dim apartment, she could still feel the cold of that night in her bones. Some memories didn't fade, they calcified. She kept one thing from the wreckage, a small burned metal fragment from her cockpit, the part where her call sign had been stenciled. The letters were almost gone now, edges charred. WRAI, the rest eaten by fire. She held it sometimes, turning it in her hand like a relic, not to mourn what she lost, but to remind herself what it cost. That mission had taken her career, her body, and the life she might have had. But it had also given her something she hadn't realized until Norfolk: perspective. The world didn't need another pilot in the sky. It needed quiet sentinels on the ground, people who could still stand, still serve, even without wings. She had made peace with that, or at least she thought she had. Until that day on the pier, when everything she'd buried came roaring back into daylight, the voice, the reflex, the command. She hadn't meant to reveal herself, she just acted. And now she was seen again. The next morning, she woke early before dawn. The world outside was still gray, the kind of quiet hour that used to belong to flight briefings and launch checklists. She brewed coffee and stood by the window watching the sky lighten. Her leg ached faintly, the old injury never fully gone, but the ache felt different now. Not punishment, reminder. Her phone buzzed on the counter, unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then she saw the caller ID, LT CMDR, hail the SEAL. She answered. "Morning, Major." "Evelyn," she corrected gently, "no rank here." He chuckled softly, old habits. Silence stretched between them. Finally, he said, "You ever think the universe doesn't let ghosts rest for a reason?" She sipped her coffee. Maybe ghosts have jobs to finish. He hesitated, then said, "There's a debrief this afternoon. They'll want you there, officially or not." "I'm not in uniform." "They don't care. After what you did yesterday, they'll listen." She said nothing. "Think about it," he added. "Not for them, for yourself." When the call ended, she stood there for a long time, staring out at the harbor where ships waited in the dawn mist. She remembered something her flight instructor once told her. long before she became Wraith. The hardest part isn't taking off, it's knowing when to land. Maybe he'd been right. She placed the burned metal fragment on the windowsill next to her bracelet. The first was a reminder of who she'd been, the second of who she'd become. And between them, she finally felt something she hadn't in years. Balance, the kind that comes after surviving both the fall and the forgiveness. She turned from the window, the light spilling across her face. The day ahead was waiting, not a mission, not a command, just life. And this time, she wasn't running from it. The conference room smelled of coffee and stale authority. Gray walls, fluorescent hum, the polished insignia of 3 branches displayed behind the long oak table. At least a dozen officers sat there, uniforms pressed to perfection, medals catching the overhead light. Every corner of the room seemed built to remind you who owned it. Evelyn stood just inside the doorway, hands loosely clasped behind her back, the way habit demanded. She wasn't wearing a uniform, just a plain blazer and jeans. It was almost defiant in its simplicity. The silence stretched as the senior official, a vice admiral with a voice that sounded like gravel dragged across steel, gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Major Reed, thank you for coming." She took the seat without comment. To her left sat Lieutenant Commander Hale, the SEAL who'd recognized her. He gave her a subtle nod. She returned it. Across the table, the Admiral studied her for a long moment, the kind of stare that weighed people more than it judged them. "I'll be honest," he said finally. "Half this room didn't believe it was really you." Evelyn said nothing. He continued. "The other half thought if it was you, you'd refuse to show up." She tilted her head slightly. "I considered it." A faint ripple of restrained amusement passed around the table. It didn't last long. "Let's address the obvious," the Admiral said, his tone hardening. "What you did yesterday was extraordinary, saved lives, prevented chaos, but it also raised questions about your background, your conduct, and your current situation." She could hear the capital letters in that last word. He leaned forward. "We pulled your file, Major. It's extensive." "I imagine so," she said quietly. "Your record ends after your ejection. The official report lists you as medically retired, permanently disabled, then nothing for 8 years. No contact, no public appearances, no service connection. Why?" Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "Because I wanted it that way." "Why?" Her eyes flicked to the window, to the faint reflection of herself, the scar barely visible against the morning light. "Because sometimes the uniform keeps you from healing." The room fell silent. It wasn't defiance in her tone, it was truth. A brigadier general from the Air Force leaned forward. "Major, if I may, we've reviewed your last mission. The records were sealed, but we had partial clearance to review. You disobeyed direct orders and engaged a hostile convoy without authorization." Her voice didn't waver. "Correct. You destroyed a foreign weapons shipment that would have reached a NATO base within hours. You also triggered an international incident that required 6 months of diplomatic repair." "Also correct. Do you regret that decision?" Evelyn paused. The air seemed to thicken. "I regret what it cost," she said slowly, "but not what it prevented." The general's pen stopped mid-note. "And what did it cost, Major?" Her answer came like a whisper. "Everything I thought I was." No one spoke. Hale shifted slightly in his seat, watching her, the way she held herself, straight-backed but not proud, calm but not detached. She wasn't performing. She wasn't defending herself. She was simply existing, the kind of presence that came only from surviving both battle and regret. The Admiral broke the silence. "Major, what happened on that pier, the way you took control, the way you led, that wasn't instinct. That was training, discipline, command presence. You may not wear the uniform, but you carry it still." Evelyn gave a faint, tired smile. "The uniform isn't the cloth, Admiral. It's what stays under your skin. He studied her a moment longer. Then, unexpectedly, his tone softened. You embarrassed one of my officers yesterday. I didn't intend to. I know, that's what makes it worse for him. Hale hid a small grin behind his hand. The Admiral set his pen down. You've become something of a symbol overnight. The story's spreading faster than we can control. The Air Force wants to issue a statement. The Navy's public affairs team wants your consent to use your name in a morale campaign. Evelyn's expression didn't change. No. The Admiral blinked. No. She shook her head. I didn't do what I did for a headline or for recruitment. Major, with all respect. With all respect, she interrupted, voice firm but quiet. Please don't turn an act of duty into an act of spectacle. The people who salute out of awe forget the ones who still serve quietly. I'd rather they remember them. The room stilled. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. The Admiral nodded slowly, almost in admiration. You really don't want the recognition. Evelyn's eyes softened. I've had recognition. It doesn't keep you warm. A colonel down the table, younger, idealistic, leaned forward. Then what do you want, Major? Her answer was so simple it disarmed the room. Peace. The word hung there, weighty, human, undeniable. Permission to continue as I am, she added quietly. To stand my post, to serve in the small ways. No one argued. The Admiral finally sighed. If that's your wish, you'll have it. But know this, you've reminded a lot of people what service actually looks like. Evelyn stood. Then maybe that's enough. He extended a hand across the table. She hesitated, then took it, firm, respectful. As she turned to leave, the Admiral said one last thing, his voice softer now. Major Reed, you once said in an interview that courage isn't loud. She looked back. It still is. Then she walked out. The hallway outside the conference room was quiet, too quiet after the charged stillness of the meeting. Evelyn walked slowly, the faint echo of her footsteps blending with the hum of ventilation. Hale followed a few paces behind. You handled that well, he said. She glanced sideways at him. You were expecting fireworks. Maybe a little. I'm too old for fireworks, she said dryly. They reached the exit doors. The morning light poured through the glass, pale, new, forgiving. For a moment, neither moved. Hale crossed his arms. You know, you could have taken their offer. They'd have made you a consultant, a trainer, maybe even reinstated you for a special post. You'd have had the power to change things. Evelyn smiled faintly. Change doesn't come from power, Commander. It comes from example. He nodded, the words settling deep. Do you ever wonder, he asked, why some people stop wearing their medals? She thought for a moment. Because they learned the difference between decoration and purpose. Hale chuckled softly. You sound like my old co. I hope he was a good one. The best, died trying to save civilians in Mosul. Evelyn's expression softened. Then he didn't die for nothing. They walked toward the parking lot in silence. The sky was bright now, the kind of crisp blue that seemed almost too clean for a world that carried so much history. When they reached her car, Hale stopped. So what happens now, Major? She rested her hands on the car door. Now, I go back to work. At the gate. She nodded. Someone has to watch the entrance. He smiled, not mockingly, but with genuine respect. You know, you might be the only person I've met who can stand at a gate like it's a command post. She met his eyes. Every post is a command post when people depend on you. He didn't argue, he just extended a hand. She shook it. His grip was firm, the kind that said, I see you, not I salute you. As he turned to leave, she called after him, Hale. He looked back. Thank you for remembering. He gave a small nod. Always. That night, Evelyn stood at her window again, the lights of Norfolk reflecting off the harbor. The letter from the Navy still lay on her table, unopened, but now it didn't bother her. She didn't need to know what they'd written. Outside, the ships rested under the stars, each one carrying stories, faces, names, some known, some forgotten. She thought about all of them, the quiet ones, the ones who didn't need medals to matter. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon. Somewhere far away, a plane crossed the night sky, a faint glimmer moving against the black. She smiled. It wasn't longing this time, it was gratitude. She'd flown higher than most people ever would. She'd fallen farther, too. But she'd learned that both the sky and the ground had their own kinds of peace. And sometimes, survival itself was the bravest kind of flight. Her eyes closed, and the voiceover of her thoughts softened, almost like a whisper carried by wind. Maybe the uniform is what makes you a soldier. Maybe it's what you keep doing after you take it off. Outside, the harbor lights flickered, small, steady and unwavering. The kind of lights that stay on long after the noise fades. The mornings came quieter now. After everything, the base had settled back into its rhythm, the same gates opening, the same engines roaring, the same ocean wind sweeping through the hangars. Life resumed as it always did. But beneath that rhythm, something had shifted. People nodded at her differently now, with respect, with caution, with something close to reverence. Evelyn didn't like it. She hadn't come back to be seen. She'd come back to serve, quietly. And so she did. Every day she arrived before dawn, unlocking the checkpoint gate, inspecting the perimeter, walking her usual patrol with the same precision as always. Her coworkers had stopped asking questions after the second week. Curiosity had faded into rumor, and rumor had settled into silence. That was how she preferred it. Still, the whispers lingered in the background, the did you know stories told in the break room, the sideways glances from the new recruits. She, grown used to it. But that changed the morning she met Private Lane. The girl couldn't have been more than 20, short-cropped blonde hair, crisp uniform, and a nervous energy that practically radiated from her. She was standing outside the checkpoint booth, fumbling with her ID badge as Evelyn approached. "You're blocking the scanner," Evelyn said gently. Lane startled, spinning around. "Oh, sorry, ma'am. I mean sorry, ma'am." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to ma'am me. I'm a civilian." "Yes, yes, ma'am." Evelyn sighed, the hint of a smile tugging at her mouth. "You're new." "First week, transferred from Pensacola. I was supposed to shadow Chief Delaney, but he said I'd learn more from you." "Did he now?" Evelyn said, scanning her badge. The light flashed green. "All right, Private, you're on my shift." Lane straightened, as if she'd just been assigned to the front line. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn pretended not to smile. They began their patrol, boots crunching on the gravel path that circled the pier. The wind came in from the water, sharp and cold. Lane shivered. "So, Lane began cautiously, "everyone says you used to be like really high up, a pilot or something." Evelyn didn't look at her. "Something." "Were you really?" Lane hesitated, then lowered her voice. "The one they call Wraith." Evelyn stopped walking. The question hung there, light as a spark and heavy as memory. "Who told you that?" she asked quietly. "Everyone," Lane admitted quickly. "They say you flew missions nobody else could, that you disappeared after some crash, that." "People say a lot of things." Evelyn's tone wasn't sharp, but it ended the topic. Lane's cheeks flushed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." Evelyn resumed walking. "You didn't. Curiosity's good, Private. Just be careful what stories you believe. The truth's usually quieter." They walked in silence after that. By mid-morning, they reached the outer fence line, the same section Evelyn had once inspected years ago, the one the Admiral had mocked her for noticing. The corrosion had returned. The ground was soft again from rain. She crouched, running her fingers along the metal. "See this?" she asked. Lane knelt beside her. "Yeah, it doesn't look like much." "It never does," Evelyn murmured. "That's how small problems turn into big ones." She pointed to the base of the post. If the soil loosens any further, that tension wire could fail. And when things fail quietly, people get hurt loudly. Lane nodded, taking notes on her tablet. Got it. Evelyn looked at her, the focus, the earnestness, the hunger to learn. It reminded her of herself once, long before the call sign, before the medals, before the fall. You want to know something most officers never understand? She asked. Lane perked up. Yes, ma'am. It's not the big moments that define you. It's the small ones, the boring ones, the times you do the right thing when no one's watching. Lane looked thoughtful. That sounds kind of hard. Evelyn smiled faintly. It's the only kind of hard worth doing. They finished their patrol. By the time they returned, the pier was bustling again, sailors marching in formation, families arriving for tour, the hum of distant machinery filling the air. Evelyn stood back, watching it all with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd learned to see beauty in order. Lane stood beside her, still clutching her notepad. Can I ask you something personal? Evelyn gave her a sidelong glance. You already have, but go ahead. When you left the Air Force, were you scared? Evelyn took a long breath, eyes drifting toward the water, terrified. Lane blinked. Really? Of course. When the thing that defined you disappears, it feels like gravity's gone too. So how'd you fix it? Evelyn smiled sadly. You don't fix it, you learn to walk without it. Lane nodded slowly, trying to absorb the weight behind the words. I think I get that. No, Evelyn said softly, you will someday. Weeks passed, the routine became theirs. Morning inspections, gate rotations, quiet conversations between rounds. Evelyn found herself talking more than she had in years, not about war or medals or regrets, but about smaller things. Discipline, integrity, watching out for your team even when they annoyed you. Lane soaked up every word. Sometimes in the shade of the guard booth, Evelyn would catch her sneaking glances, not in awe but in study. As if trying to decode her, Evelyn pretended not to notice. One afternoon, Lane came to her with trembling hands. Ma'am, I need advice. Evelyn set down her clipboard. All right. My unit lead, he keeps skipping the safety checks for vehicle inspections. Says it's a waste of time. If I report it, I'll be labeled a snitch. But if I do... Evelyn's gaze sharpened. Then someone might get hurt. Lane nodded miserably. Yeah. Do you know what courage looks like, Private? Lane hesitated. Doing something dangerous. No, Evelyn said softly. Doing something right. Lane exhaled shakily. So you'd report it. I'd document it, every time, quietly. Let truth do its work. Courage doesn't always need a confrontation. Sometimes it just needs patience. Lane absorbed the words, her shoulders straightening. Thank you, ma'am. Evelyn studied her, saw the fire building beneath the fear. It made her strangely proud and strangely sad. Lane, she said as the girl turned to leave, don't let anyone tell you silence is weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Lane smiled faintly. You sound like you've done this before. Evelyn looked away, once or twice. That night, Evelyn sat by her window again, but this time, she wasn't alone. Lane had stopped by after shift, bringing 2 mugs of coffee like a peace offering. They sat in silence for a while, watching the city lights ripple across the water. Ma'am, Lane said after a long pause, can I ask something else? Of course. When people talk about courage, they always make it sound easy, like if you're brave, you just know what to do. Evelyn smiled faintly. That's not courage, that's confidence. Courage is doing what you must even when you don't know what comes after. Lane nodded slowly. You ever wish you'd done things differently? Evelyn stared into her coffee. Every day, but wishing is a form of looking backward. I try to look forward. Lane hesitated. Do you ever miss flying? Evelyn's eyes lifted toward the night sky. Every time I look up, but I learned something. What's that? The sky doesn't belong to the ones who fly. It belongs to the ones who keep others safe beneath it. Lane looked at her, really looked, and in that moment she saw past the legend, past the stories, past the quiet armor Evelyn wore. She saw the cost, the loss, the strength that came from both. "I hope I end up like you," she said softly. Evelyn smiled, shaking her head. "No, you don't. You end up like you. That's the point." They sat there until the coffee went cold, until the harbor lights blurred into the reflection of stars. When Lane left, Evelyn stood at the window for a long time, watching her go, young, determined, walking with purpose into a world that hadn't yet learned her shape. And for the first time in years, Evelyn felt something stir inside her, not guilt, not grief, but something lighter. Hope, the kind that doesn't roar, the kind that hums quietly beneath the noise of duty. She realized then that maybe her purpose wasn't to escape the past or hide from the legend. Maybe it was to guide the ones who came after her, to make sure they learned the lessons she'd paid for. Because legacy isn't written in medals or missions. It's written in people. And somewhere between the sea and the stars, Evelyn Reed, once wraith, always watchful, finally understood what peace really meant. It wasn't silence. It was continuation. The rain began just after midnight. It wasn't a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle that blurred the lights along the pier into long silver smears. Evelyn stood under the awning of the checkpoint booth, hands in her pockets, watching the drops streak down the glass. Nights like this were the hardest. Quiet, empty, too much room for thought. Most of the base slept. The air smelled of wet concrete and jet fuel, the distant hum of a generator breaking the silence every few seconds. She, grown used to that sound, the pulse of vigilance. Across the lot, Lane sat in the small operations shed, headset tilted, eyes glued to the security monitors. She'd come a long way in a few months, sharper now, calmer under pressure, her nervous energy tempered by experience. Evelyn had watched it happen piece by piece, the way a soldier becomes solid. "Gates clear," Lane's voice came softly over the radio. "Copy," Evelyn replied. "Do a sweep of cameras 5 through 9. "Already on it." A small smile crept across Evelyn's face. "Good." The rain thickened. She was about to step inside when something flickered on the far side of the perimeter fence, a brief flash of movement gone as quickly as it appeared. She frowned, leaning forward. Probably a stray reflection, she thought. Still. She keyed her radio. "Lane, camera 7, zoom in. Eastern fence line near maintenance access." "Got it, hold on." There was a pause, the faint crackle of static. Then Lane's voice returned, quieter. "Ma'am, I've got movement." Evelyn straightened. "Animal." "Negative, 2, maybe 3 figures. No base badges." Her pulse quickened. Civilian perimeter breaches weren't unheard of, thrill seekers, sometimes protesters. But something about the formation, the deliberate spacing of the figures, felt wrong. "Lock down the inner gate," Evelyn said, already stepping into the rain. "And alert base security. Use code 9. "On it." She moved fast but quiet, scanning as she went. The wind whipped rain into her eyes, the taste of salt and metal sharp on her tongue. Every sense sharpened, memory folding time back, desert air, calm chatter, the old rhythm of mission readiness. She wasn't supposed to feel it again, but here it was. At the fence line, the shadows resolved, 3 silhouettes, low to the ground, near a service duct that ran beneath the outer barrier. Not protesters, trained. "Unauthorized personnel," she called out, voice carrying through the rain. "Step away from the fence and show your hands." No response. She reached for her sidearm, standard issue, non-lethal but enough to command attention. Last warning. Then everything moved at once. One of the intruders bolted toward the duct, another raised a flashlight blinding white, while the third threw something metallic over the fence. Evelyn dropped instinctively, the object landing with a dull clink beside her. Smoke burst upward in a thick, choking cloud. Tear gas. Her eyes watered. She coughed, pressing her sleeve over her mouth, and hit her radio. Lane, gas canister outer perimeter. Activate lights and sirens. Copy. Lane's voice came back, strained but steady. Floodlights exploded to life, cutting through the rain. The intruders froze, silhouettes stark against the glare. Evelyn pushed to her feet, lungs burning. "Stop right there," she shouted, weapon leveled. They hesitated, then scattered. One sprinted toward the dock. Another dove under the maintenance scaffolding. The third, the one with the flashlight, turned straight toward her. Evelyn didn't think, she moved. Her body reacted on instinct, sidestep, deflect, strike, years of hand-to-hand training surging back from the deep muscle memory of survival. The man swung. She caught his wrist, twisted, dropped him hard into the mud. He hit the ground with a grunt. She pressed her boot to his shoulder, disarming him in one motion. "Who sent you?" He didn't answer, just glared up at her, rain and blood mingling on his face. Behind her, alarms blared. Lane's voice came through the radio, breathless. "Security's en route. 2 suspects heading for the dock." Evelyn's pulse steadied. "Stay in the booth, Lane. Do not leave your post." "Ma'am, I can." "That's in order." She left the man in the mud, sprinting toward the dock. Her leg ached, the old injury screaming in protest, but she pushed through it. The rain blurred everything into streaks of silver and shadow. Up ahead, one of the intruders reached the edge of the pier, trying to pry open a maintenance hatch. The other stood lookout, back turned. Evelyn slowed, breath controlled, steps silent. She was close enough to hear their voices, muffled, foreign, hurried. Words she didn't recognize, but tones she did. Panic. She raised her weapon, hands up now. They spun. One ran. The other drew something from his jacket, a detonator. For a fraction of a second, the world went silent. Then Evelyn lunged. The struggle was fast and brutal. She caught his wrist just as his thumb hit the switch, twisting his arm until the device clattered to the ground. The man drove a knee into her side. She stumbled, pain flashing white. He broke free and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Evelyn hit the radio again. "Lane, Pier 7, possible explosive. I need EOD now." "Copy." She dropped to her knees beside the device. Small, compact, not enough to level the pier, but enough to kill anyone nearby. Her fingers hovered over the casing. It had a timer, but the display was dark. She exhaled. Her hands trembled slightly as she examined it, old training resurfacing, every second heavy. The rain hissed over the circuit board, shorting faint sparks. Then she heard footsteps behind her. "Ma'am." Lane's voice. Evelyn spun. "Lane, I told you to stay back." "I couldn't. I heard the explosion." "It hasn't exploded yet." Lane froze, eyes wide as she saw the device. "Oh my God." Evelyn gestured sharply. "Radio again, clear the area, get everyone off this pier now." "But..." "Now, Private." Lane hesitated, torn between fear and obedience. Then she ran. Evelyn turned back to the device. The casing was old, military-grade, maybe stolen. She recognized the type. She'd seen one once in a training briefing overseas. It wasn't set to a timer. It was set to a trigger. Her chest tightened, remote activated. She scanned the surroundings, eyes cutting through rain and darkness. Somewhere out there, one of them still had the detonator. And Lane was running right toward the open pier. "Lane," Evelyn shouted, scrambling to her feet. "Get down." Too late, a sharp click echoed from the shadows. Evelyn dove forward, tackling Lane behind a steel barrier just as the device erupted in a flash of fire and sound. The blast lifted them both, slamming them against the deck. For a few heartbeats, there was nothing, just ringing ears, smoke, and the taste of copper. When her vision cleared, Evelyn found herself half covering Lane, shielding her with her own body. The younger woman blinked up, dazed but alive. "Are you okay?" Evelyn rasped. Lane coughed, nodding. You pulled me back." Evelyn managed a tight smile. "That's my job." Security teams swarmed the pier moments later. Sirens, radios, floodlights cutting through smoke. The surviving intruder was pinned near the dock, shouting in a language none of them understood. Evelyn tried to stand, but her leg buckled. Lane caught her wide-eyed. "Ma'am, you're hurt." "Just old damage," she said, voice steady but thin. Medics rushed over, trying to guide her onto a stretcher. She waved them off. "Help the others first." Lane grabbed her hand. "You saved me." Evelyn looked at her, really looked. The young soldier's face streaked with soot, her eyes wide but unbroken. She saw herself there years ago, when courage was still new and fear still loud. "Listen to me," Evelyn said softly. "You did everything right tonight." I froze. "No, you came back, that's courage." Tears welled in Lane's eyes. Why didn't you just?" "Because sometimes you don't have time to think, you just act." Lane swallowed hard, like instinct. Evelyn smiled faintly, like duty. She turned as the Admiral arrived, his coat drenched, expression grim. "Report," he demanded. Evelyn gestured toward the wreckage. 3 intruders. 1 device detonated prematurely. No civilian casualties. The Admiral nodded, all flickering beneath his exhaustion. "And you?" "Still standing." He looked at her, soaked, limping, covered in soot, and shook his head. "You have an uncanny habit of being in the right place at the worst time, Major." She met his eyes. "That's usually when someone needs to be there." He exhaled slowly, a rare smile breaking through the tension. "Remind me never to doubt a quiet post again." She gave a small nod. "You've learned well." As the emergency crews cleared the scene, Lane stood beside her, silent, watching the chaos fade. Evelyn rested a hand on her shoulder. "You did good tonight," she said. "I don't feel like it." "You will, later, when it hits you what didn't happen." Lane looked at her, voice trembling. "I was scared." "So was I," Evelyn admitted. "You didn't look it." Evelyn's smile was soft, weary. "That's the trick. You don't have to be fearless, you just have to keep moving." They stood in silence, rain falling harder now, washing the soot from their faces. The harbor lights flickered back to life. The smell of smoke mingled with salt and storm. Somewhere behind them, a senior officer shouted orders. The night returned to its rhythm. Alarms, radios, engines, all part of the same endless cycle of duty. But for Evelyn, something had shifted again. This time it wasn't about redemption or recognition. It was about succession. The quiet, unglamorous act of passing on what mattered most, courage without arrogance, strength without noise, leadership without rank. She looked at Lane and saw the future standing there, bright, scared, determined. And for the first time, she felt old in the best possible way. As dawn began to break through the thinning clouds, Evelyn let herself exhale. The mission, whatever it had been all along, felt complete now. Lane glanced sideways. "Ma'am, what happens next?" Evelyn watched the sunrise over the harbor, the light catching the water in soft gold. "Next," she said, voice quiet but certain, "we keep watch." The younger woman nodded, following her gaze. Together, they stood in the early morning light, 2 silhouettes against a waking sky, the past and the future sharing the same horizon. And somewhere in that silence, Evelyn realized that legacy doesn't begin when you're remembered. It begins when you teach someone else how to stand their post. The sea was calm again. 2 days had passed since the breach. The rain had lifted, leaving behind the kind of clear morning light that made everything seem sharper, more honest. The damage along the pier was minimal, a few broken rails, scattered debris, a blackened patch of concrete. You'd never know how close they came to disaster. But Evelyn knew. She felt it in her bones. The doctors had insisted she take leave, rest, recover process, but she'd refused the rest part. She'd never been good at staying still. So she came back to her post, limping slightly, uniform jacket zipped against the wind. Somewhere behind her, footsteps approached. Lane. "Morning, ma'am." Evelyn didn't turn. "You're early." "So are you." "Old habits," she said softly. Lane stood beside her, following her gaze out over the water. Ships were moving again, gray silhouettes cutting through the morning mist. The flag at the far end of the dock rippled in the wind. "Security report says the men we caught were hired," Lane said quietly. "Foreign contractors. They don't know by who yet." "They never do," Evelyn replied. Lane hesitated. "You think it was worth it?" Evelyn glanced at her. "You mean what happened the other night?" Lane nodded. "All that risk, the injuries, the panic." Evelyn's voice was calm, steady. "Every time you stand between chaos and calm, it's worth it." Lane thought about that, then smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple." "It is. That's what makes it right." The wind picked up, brushing strands of hair across Evelyn's face. She tucked them behind her ear and leaned against the railing. "Command called again this morning," Lane said after a while. "They want to give you a commendation." Evelyn sighed. "Of course they do." "You're not going to take it, are you?" "No." Lane frowned. "Why not? You deserve it." Evelyn turned to her, eyes soft but firm. "If I take it, people start talking about me. I'd rather they talk about what happened, about the training, the vigilance, the teamwork. That's what saves lives, not medals." Lane smiled faintly. "You really hate attention, don't you?" Evelyn chuckled. "I don't hate it, I just don't trust it." They stood in silence for a while. The sun had risen higher now, the light reflecting off the wet deck. Somewhere gulls circled, their cries distant and sharp. "Ma'am," Lane asked suddenly, "can I tell you something?" Evelyn nodded. "When I first got here, I thought this place was just a job. I didn't think it mattered much. But watching you, the way you notice everything, the way you treat people, it made me realize something." Evelyn waited. "It's not about the job," Lane said. "It's about the standard you set when no one's watching." Evelyn smiled, a small, proud, tired smile. "That's the lesson most people never learn." Lane looked at her. "You taught me." The simplicity of it hit Evelyn harder than she expected. There was no grand speech, no ceremony, just a truth passed from one soul to another. "Thank you," she said quietly. Lane nodded. "You going to stay here long?" Evelyn turned back toward the sea. "As long as they'll have me, as long as I can stand." The younger woman hesitated. "And after?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then it's your post." Lane blinked. "Mine." "Someone has to keep watch." For a moment neither spoke. Then Lane nodded, solemnly, like she understood the weight of what was being passed to her. "I won't let you down." "I know," Evelyn said softly. "That's why I can let go." Later that afternoon, Evelyn found herself walking the long road back toward the main gate. The same road she'd walked hundreds of times, but this time it felt different, lighter. She paused halfway, turning to look back. The base stretched behind her, all steel and silence, humming with quiet purpose. Every hangar, every tower, every fence post, she knew them all. They were part of her now, stitched into her memory like the threads of a uniform she no longer wore. A voice came from behind her. "Major Reed." It was the Admiral. No entourage, no formalities, just him. He approached with the careful steps of someone carrying both respect and apology. "Sir," Evelyn greeted. "I thought you'd be gone by now," he said. "Not yet." He nodded. "I heard you turned down the commendation." "I did." He sighed, but there was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. "You know, you make it very difficult for us to celebrate you." "Then maybe celebrate what we built instead." He studied her for a moment, the calm strength, the quiet conviction that didn't need permission. Then he said softly, "You remind me why I joined in the first place." She tilted her head, "And why was that?" "To serve something that didn't need applause." She smiled, "Then you remember right." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small, weathered box. "This isn't official," he said, "just personal." He opened it. Inside lay a single silver pin, an unmarked insignia, simple, worn. "It belonged to my mentor," the Admiral said. "He gave it to me the day I made command. Said it wasn't a symbol of authority but of accountability." He held it out. "Now I think it belongs to you." Evelyn hesitated. "I can't." "Yes, you can. You've carried accountability longer than most of us carry rank." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she took the pin, her fingers brushing the cold metal. "Thank you, Admiral." He nodded once. "You've earned more than we can give. You always have." He turned to leave but stopped halfway. "You know, Reed." She looked up. "When people tell your story, they'll probably make it louder than it was." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then they'll miss the point." He nodded. "Maybe so, but some of us will remember the quiet parts." And with that he walked away, leaving her standing in the golden light of late afternoon, the silver pin glinting softly in her hand. That evening the harbor was still. The sky turned a deep orange before fading into violet. Evelyn stood at the same window she'd watched so many times before, only now it felt like a goodbye, not to a place, but to a chapter. She pinned the insignia onto her jacket pocket, just below the faint scar that traced her jawline. It wasn't a badge of rank. It was a memory, a reminder that service had never really ended. She poured herself a small cup of coffee, sat by the window, and let the silence fill the space around her. For the first time in years it wasn't heavy, it was peaceful. Her thoughts drifted to the crash, to the years in the shadows, to the mocking laughter of those who'd once doubted her, and finally to the faces that had replaced them, the SEALs who'd called her Major, the young recruit who'd found her courage, the admiral who'd remembered why duty mattered. It wasn't redemption she felt now, it was resolution. Because redemption seeks forgiveness, resolution simply understands. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt through the open window. Somewhere out at sea, a ship horn echoed faintly, low, steady, enduring. Evelyn smiled. And then softly she spoke, to no one, to everyone. Maybe strength isn't proven in the fight. Maybe it's proven in the return. In the quiet way we choose to stand again. When no one's watching. She leaned back, eyes closing for a moment as the voiceover of memory faded into thought. They mocked the guard. They forgot she'd once been a guardian. But dignity doesn't raise its voice. It simply waits until truth calls it by name. The lights of the base glimmered below her window, small, steady points of gold against the dark. Each one a reminder that someone was still awake, still keeping watch, still holding the line. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her reflection barely visible in the glass. She didn't look like the legend in the stories. She looked real, human, weathered, alive. And for the first time since the crash, she didn't feel like a ghost in uniform. She felt like herself. The night deepened, the harbor lights shimmered. The world outside went on loud, restless, unaware. But inside that quiet room, one truth lingered, soft, unspoken, and eternal. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it does, the world remembers, not the noise, but the silence that followed,